Hi, mystery writers. Welcome to Write a Killer Mystery. My name is ZaraAltair. This is where we learn to make a good mystery great. And today I want to talk about how to control the narrative pacing in your novel. It's so important, especially in a mystery. First, I want to thank my supporters on Patreon. Their support helps bring these videos and supports my writing. So thank you. Okay, what is narrative pacing? It's a term to describe how the book feels to the reader. And you can control how that feels. Is it slow? Is it fast? It's the momentum the reader feels to pull them forward in this story. And it's what keeps them turning the pages when you control the pacing. Your reader wants to feel immersed in the actions and thoughts of your characters. Screenwriter David Mamet said, clunky language, bad dialogue, and poorly conceived scenes will all draw your reader out of the story. Pace will help keep them there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Good pacing is crucial to the flow of your story's narrative. It's the glue that cements your reader to the story. When pacing fails, readers become disinterested, disappointed, or even angry. They may not know why the story didn't hold their interest, but they may put down your book and never pick it up again. So pacing is very important for that reader connection. In a mystery novel, you want to keep the reader involved in guessing that final outcome while leading them through the story through the eyes of the detective. So you control the pace and the tension building in the story, scene by scene. So let's look at a few ways you can control your pacing. The very first one is the language that you use. It's the language that speeds up the story or slows it down. Dialogue and action speed things up. You keep the paragraph short. Visually, your reader sees a lot of white space on the page. They're just going down that page, reading down and getting very involved in the action. Descriptive passages, on the other hand, tend to slow down the story, and if you need narrative description, I suggest breaking up the text into short paragraphs rather than one long passage, so that your reader may skip the whole long passage, where if you break it up into shorter chunks, they'll take it in. This helps your reader keep going down the page. So it's a feeling. This is all about this feeling the reader has while they're reading your story. So if you find yourself with long narrative passages, even if they're in short paragraphs, you can break them up with short pieces of dialogue, and even a short 2 or 3 line exchange can liven up the pace of your story. And on the other hand, if you have a long section of dialogue, you can put brief narrative descriptions in between what the characters are saying. You can tell what the character is seeing or how the weather affects their actions right there in the scene. Then you keep your reader grounded in the time and place. So, and at the paragraph level, you want to vary your sentence length between short sentences and long sentences, and that variety instills interest. If you have a lot of long sentences, that can feel like it's slowing down the reader, and if you have a lot of short sentences, they can feel like it's going too fast and they're missing things. So varying the sentence length, believe it or not, makes a difference in how your reader feels as they're going through your story. Okay, so we have language, and then conflict is very important to the pace of your story. So to create a successful conflict, first your reader must be invested in the character. They have to care about that character. Otherwise, they won't care about the threat, large or small, to the character's well-being. I was just watching the English language version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and I was thinking about this when I was, this is a movie, not a book, but when I was watching the scene where she gets her revenge with her guardian. And in the Swedish version, I was like rooting for her. I was like, you know, this guy couldn't do, nothing you could do would be enough. And in the English language version, I didn't care. It felt very cold. And I was thinking about that because it makes a difference. Caring about the character really makes a difference in how you respond to whatever action is going on. Okay, so early on in your story, you want to introduce your reader to your character's vulnerability and to their desire. These are the two, the desire is what drives them through the story, and their vulnerability, their weakness, whatever you want to call it, is what gets them into trouble when they're presented with any kind of obstacle or conflict with another character. So setting up this contrast of the desire and the vulnerability immediately introduces your reader to tension and prepares your reader for any obstacles that confront your character later in the story. They're going to wonder how this vulnerability is going to mess things up. So early on, really give them a sense of what's in store for the readers, what those vulnerabilities are that can cause problems for your hero, as clever and wonderful as they may be, how those vulnerabilities can make life difficult for them. So each subsequent conflict, whether large or small, tests your character's strengths and weaknesses. And as you introduce a character trait or opinion and response, you give your reader more opportunity to care about your character. So save the fight scenes till later in the story, because your reader's not going to care about who wins the fight until they care about the character in the fight, if that makes sense to you. So first give your reader reasons to empathize and care for your character. And that's going to give your conflict some punch in the story. And then adding to that are the stakes. What is involved? What are the consequences? Every time your protagonist or any character in your story or in the subplot, any time a character faces an obstacle or a conflict, what is at stake? Your reader needs to know what's at stake. So this helps care about that character, and it helps them care about your character reaching their ultimate goal. And of course, in a mystery, that is solving the puzzle. I've lost my train of thought. The reader needs to know the consequences of not reaching the goal, okay? So if there's a conflict and your character's on course for reaching something, and the conflict is threatening your character's ability to reach their goal, what are the stakes? What is going to happen if your character can't reach their goal? So mystery writers have a clear goal. It's catch the villain, right? But you also need to clarify what the stakes are if your sleuth fails, because you've got big long novel for lots of obstacles to appear and many ways for your protagonist to fail. So as your sleuth tries to solve the mystery puzzle, smaller goals and accompanying stakes help you build conflict and tension in that long middle. And here's where you can make the situation go from bad to worse. And just to add complication, what if your character gets what they want, but getting what they want puts them in an even worse position than they were before the start of that scene? So you can bump up the stakes by adding a ticking clock, and your sleuth must solve the crime before a certain time. For an amateur sleuth, you can invent a deadline relating to their personal life. They're leaving in 3 days. Their mom's in the hospital, whatever it is. You need to be careful with law enforcement professionals and a ticking clock. For instance, a homicide detective would not take on a case 1 month before retirement. It just would be assigned to somebody else. So be careful. Know what really happens in the law enforcement world before you come up with unrealistic situations that seem like they're going to give your character a conflict. But with law enforcement, you need to know how it really works. So just giving you that caveat. So stakes build tension, and when your protagonist meets an obstacle and the reader knows the consequences of failure, they become emotionally invested in the scene. So pacing, once again, is about how your reader feels as they're reading your story. And so we're talking about language and conflict and stakes, and how do you get down to that at a granular level? And that is with your scenes. Scenes are the building blocks of your story. So you can control the pacing, fast, slow, with scene sequences. You balance the action scenes with reflective internal moments, and you give your reader excitement and recovery. You are creating the momentum of the story. So you use the quieter scenes to share relationship details or your character's thoughts and memories or concepts. They can take a break from sleuthing, as it were, out there on the trail. And these scenes are important because they give readers a chance to orient themselves in the story and process their reactions to what happened before. So you don't want to go from action to action to action to action. You need to let your reader internalize what just happened. James Lee Burke does this with Dave Robichaux. He sends him out fishing between really dramatic moments. So that gives his character time to reflect and time to kind of reorganize his thoughts. And it also gives the reader a time to catch up with all the things that are happening. So the balance between action and reflection keep your reader from tedium or overwhelm. So tedium is just like long narrative with nothing going on. And overwhelm is there's just so much action, it starts to feel unrealistic and unbelievable. And also when it's action after action after action, your reader starts, I know it seems crazy, but the reader starts to lose interest. It's like there's no time for the reader to catch up with what just happened. So you need to give your reader those interim breaks where they can go, oh my gosh, the bad guy just, and they can think about that instead of taking them from one big action scene to another big action scene. And that is part of the pacing, that you balance between the action and the reflective scenes. Because the purpose of each scene is to move the story forward. So beginning writers often wrestle with scenes filled with description or backstory because they feel the reader needs to know everything. But guess what? The reader doesn't need to know everything. You can, especially for mystery writers, you can, reveal things in small bits rather than just giving them the whole thing that happened 20 years ago. And it's going to help. And then Randy Ingermanson outlines the 3 basic components of alternating active and reactive scenes. He calls them scene and reaction scene. I call them active and reactive. But I wanted to share that with you because if you go back and forth between these 2 scenes, you're going to, 1, control your pacing, and 2, keep your reader going and involved in your story. Okay, so the active scene, this is what you could call your action scene, the place where stuff happens. So it starts with a goal, it has a conflict, and there's a disaster. Something not good happens. And then the sequel scene, the reactive scene, is a reaction to what just happened. And the dilemma that action at the end, the disaster at the end of the action scene presented, the dilemma that has arisen, and then the decision of what step to take next. So active scene is goal, conflict, disaster. Reaction scene is reaction, dilemma, and decision. And I know this sounds formulaic, but as you write your story and you just go back and forth between these 2 types of scenes, you'll find that it all works. I know it seems simplistic, but you'll find that alternating the scenes creates the balance you need to maintain pacing throughout your story. Because you build tension, you keep following the same action, reaction scene, but you build the tension by escalating the conflict and raising the stakes. But you keep that scene alternation sequence. I hope that makes sense. Maybe I can explain it again. You're going to alternate the scenes, action, reaction, action, reaction. And the way that you build tension in the story is by making the conflict more difficult, so escalating the conflict, and also making the consequences of a wrong action even bigger, so that's raising the stakes. So you build bigger conflict, you raise the stakes, but you still give your reader those breaks with the reaction scenes. Okay, so ultimately we have tension that builds to the climax. So using all these pacing techniques, you build tension by raising stakes and putting your hero at greater risk. And whether it's a decision that leads to action or action that leads to a new decision, you keep alternating your scenes. So test your hero's weaknesses, use his strengths to create conflict, and your pacing is the momentum that pushes your reader toward that final climax. So I think if you get nothing else out of this episode of Write a Killer Mystery, it's that the pacing is under your control. It can be one of the biggest challenges for beginning writers, and these guidelines may seem simple: short and long sentences, action and dialogue, conflict and stakes, alternating scenes. But actually, if you master these concepts, it will help you write your story. Master writers use these same techniques. So test your skills. See how this works. So write 2 scenes in your story incorporating these techniques. Just give it a try. See how this works. And you'll find, first of all, they're not limiting, and you'll discover that they help you build momentum in your story. Okay, that was a lot, but pacing is very important to keep your reader involved, and at the same time, it is under your control. So you have the ability to control that pacing as the reader goes and keep them involved in the story and keep them caring about your protagonist. All right, so thank you for being here. Hope this helps with writing mysteries. I think it's fun creating those puzzles and having your sleuth solve them, and really appreciate you being here. If you like this video, buy me a cup of coffee. There's a link in the description below. All right, I will see you next time. Meantime, keep writing.